Hi and welcome to the channel. It's David here, the Vinyl Vulture. Hope you're all well. So the title of this video is my first time listening to King Crimson. Now I did a similar video a few weeks ago called My First Time Listening to Genesis. Now on that video I was exploring the early Genesis. So the later Genesis, obviously I'd heard that stuff on the radio, all the Phil Collins hits and all the big stuff, but it was the early classic stuff that I was completely unfamiliar with. So I went through album by album and I found it quite challenging actually. But over time and going back to those Genesis albums, I actually fell in love, or I've fallen in love, should I say, with Genesis, early Genesis. And I've grown to really like it. So I'm going to do a similar thing on this video, only with the band King Crimson. Now, there's a bit of a white lie here because I have heard King Crimson before. I own a copy of the album Red on vinyl and I absolutely love that album. I think it's fantastic. And I've also heard In the Court of the Crimson King. But, now here's the thing. I heard it about 20 years ago, maybe played half of it and thought, this isn't for me, I didn't like it. It wasn't what I was after at the time. Sometimes, music reaches you at a point where you're not ready for it, and then other times it does. And so I think King Crimson at that time just came to me and I just thought, no, I don't like this. This isn't for me. So I'm going to listen to that album properly, and I'm going to listen to all the other early King Crimson albums. And this time I'm going to avoid the mistake I made on the Genesis video, which was to just listen through them once and then give my kind of thoughts and feelings about each album. So what I'm going to do now on this video is I'm going to listen through each album twice. I'm going to kind of sit with it, digest it and absorb it a bit more. And then I'm going to give my thoughts. So although the Genesis video was quite interesting from a point of just seeing my first reaction, I want to kind of let the music soak in a little bit more, and I can absorb it, and then I can kind of decide what I think and feel about each album. So with that being said, I'm going to dip into the first album now for the first time in 20 years, In the Court of the Crimson King. And the next time you see me, I will have listened to it twice the way through and hopefully taken it all in, and I can tell you what my thoughts are on this album and this band. So here we go. So hi again guys, I've just been listening to In the Court of the Crimson King. Had a good listen through a couple of times yesterday, so obviously it's the next day. And then I had another flick through this morning. First impressions, when I first listened through the first track, 21st Century Schizoid Man, I'd heard that riff before and I didn't realise what it was. Fantastic riff. I mean, what a way to open an album, what a way to open a debut album. So angular and kind of quirky, especially for the time. You got Hendrix and Cream and Led Zeppelin were just coming out. So it really was guitar riff-tastic at the time. And I think Sabbath had probably coming out around that period as well. So everyone was doing heavy guitar riffs, mostly blues-based. And then King Crimson come out with that. It's very, very different guitar sound from Robert Fripp. Wonderful stuff. My first impression was the drums are off. I was listening to him thinking, why doesn't he just play a groove, to make that riff kind of flow? And then the second time I listened through the album, I thought, no, that makes sense now. It kind of makes it more disjointed, makes it more angular, and almost kind of makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable at times, which is, unsettling. That's the word I'm looking for. And so I think that's the purpose of some of this music, is to kind of like shake you a little bit. And I really get that. The drums make sense now. The addition of a saxophone as well in there is really different, especially for a rock band or prog band, should we say. It really
does kind of shake it up a little bit, because, you know, bands at that time didn't really use wind instruments apart from Jethro Tull and maybe Family. Did Family have wind instruments, or am I imagining that? I think I'm imagining that. So that addition really kind of makes a difference in an unusual way. I really like that. The second song, I Talk to the Wind, I liked it, but I didn't love it. I've listened to the album a few times, and I thought that was pretty good song, but not amazing. Then Epitaph, I thought was a great track. There's some Mellotron going on this album. I think there's Mellotron all over it, but I love the use of the Mellotron. You know, it's kind of like slightly out of tune-ness, should we say. That really adds to the quirkiness and the unsettling feeling that this album is giving me. And then there's a song called Moonchild, which was cool, and then had some kind of abstract jazz kind of noodlings at the end, which I enjoyed. You know, I'm a big jazz fan. This was going into kind of like free abstract jazz, I think. You know, and the guitar tone had changed. You know, it was more using more of a kind of middly kind of jazz guitar sound with some very strange abstract drumming and percussion going on. What I will say is Greg Lake, I didn't realise was on this album actually. And some wonderful bass playing, and yeah, it's a good singer. You know, he's got a good voice. So was surprised that he was on here, you know, from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And then what happened after that? Oh, and then the title track, which is my favourite, In the Court of the Crimson King. What a great song. I mean, such an unusual kind of melody, especially for the time. You know, the use of the mellotron and those kind of backing vocals, you know, choral backing vocals, you know, that was kind of like the classical influence, I suppose, on this album. Yeah, just great. So a couple of listens through, and I really like this album. It's a really great record. Do I want to rush out and buy it? Possibly at some point. I will buy it. I don't know if I'll buy an original on vinyl, because they're about 150 quid, aren't they? That's crazy money. But I'd definitely buy a repress. It's a great album. Apparently the very first prog rock album as well. So I've read online. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate. I think my friend Andy Edwards would probably have a counter argument to that. But yeah, 1969 this came out. It's incredible, the sound. It sounds like nothing else. It doesn't sound like the Beatles or the Stones or Hendrix or Zeppelin. It's completely its own entity, and so amazingly unique and original. So I'm really loving this album, and looking forward to delving into the next one, which is In the Wake of Poseidon from 1970. I haven't heard a single note of this record, so I'm very excited to hear this. And I'm going to delve in again. I'm going to listen to it a few times, give it a few spins, make sure it sinks in, and then I'll be back and I'll let you know what my thoughts on that record. So be back shortly after In the Wake of Poseidon. See you in a bit. So I've just listened to the Poseidon one. I can't remember exactly the title now. What is the title of it? Oh, it's gone out of my head. Anyway, really enjoyed this record. I thought it was very similar to the debut one. I thought it was very kind of in the same vein. There's a song called Cat Food, which is absolutely wild. It's a bit like a weird kind of Captain Beefheart type blues turnaround, if I've got that right. But I really enjoyed that one, thought it was great. The title track I wasn't that keen on, to be honest. It kind of meandered a little bit, and there's one called The Devil's Triangle, which I quite enjoyed just because it was so wild and out there. This band's like really mature, is one of my thoughts. Really mature to say that this is their second album. You know, the first album was really kind of, you know, progressive. When I compare them to like Genesis and Yes, who were happening at the same time, they, you know, King Crimson are much kind of further down the line, should we say, than those other bands. But this second album, not that kind of mad about. Like I say, there's a few tracks I like. What else was on there? I'm trying to think of titles. The titles have gone out of my head. I'm terrible. I'm getting old. But yeah, it's a really good album. I listened to it twice. You know, I wouldn't go wild over it, but there we go. So I'm going to move on to the third one even, which is called Lizard, I do believe. So the next time you see me, I should probably be in another weird location, having listened to Lizard a few times. So yeah, see you in a bit. So hi again. I've just finished listening to the album Lizard. I've listened through it twice. In fact, I listened through it 3 times almost. And on the first listen, I was pretty unsure. I thought, okay, some of this is a bit kind of meandering, maybe, and I couldn't quite get into it. Then, obviously, I persevered and gave it another listen. And the second listen, I was starting to click. Things started to make sense. The opening song, Circus. It's how can I describe Circus? It's such a weird piece of music. These guys love the mellotron. There's some great use of the acoustic guitar by Robert Fripp. He's doing some really weird stuff on there, and then it kind of comes in and out with kind of this riff on the electric guitar that he's doing, which is, it's heavy but it's not, and it's kind of dark, and kind of weird kind of riffs. There's no kind of bluesiness or kind of catchy hooks with this stuff. I think melodically it's very similar to the previous albums, the kind of, the melodies and things like that. But I did really enjoy the song Circus. I thought it was great. Listening through a second time, like I say, it got better. The second song, Indoor Games, it's okay. It's a bit of a kind of strange kind of blues turnaround. I listened to it 2-3 times and it's okay. I'm not a massive fan of it. I like the drumming. I like the drum sound. That nice kind of early 70s drum sound. I really like that thing. And I feel that the bass playing on this album is less prominent than, especially the first album, which was Greg Lake. The bass playing doesn't kind of shine through so much on this album, I don't think. But the drumming is cool. Again, I think it's a different drummer on this album. I'm not quite sure of who's playing what on these records, by the way. I know for sure it's Robert Fripp, and I think there's a guy called Gordon Haskell playing on this album, singing on this album. He's got a good voice. He's a decent voice. And I like the kind of English folk aesthetic that King Crimson have. I forgot to mention that about the other albums that I've listened to. I do like the folkiness of it. I'm a big fan of Richard Thompson, and I'm not saying Richard Thompson or King Crimson sound similar, but they've both got this kind of, especially Richard Thompson, got an English folk kind of approach to things. And I think King Crimson have got that too. So that's the only thing I can really draw close to it. I think Crimson are very jazzy in places. There's lots of kind of jazz references going on. They don't swing or anything like that, but there's lots of kind of weird turns or some odd time signatures. Some of the chord voicings are very jazzy in places. So where am I going with this? So the next song was what's the next song after Indoor Games? It's Happy Families. Yeah, I thought that was very similar to Indoor Games. I thought the two songs could almost be one song, really. I think they were very similar, very kind of similar key changes and things like that. So it was it's better than Indoor Games, but I just thought, well, why have two songs similar on this record? That was my feeling. Then there was a slow song called Lady of Something. I can't remember the title, I'm sorry. Now there's been a few slow songs on these albums, and I'm not keen on them, I've got to be honest. They don't really do anything for me, the slow songs. I kind of like the big epic things, and I like the stretched out kind of arrangements and things that they're doing, and the kind of odd time signatures and the quirky kind of key changes. I really dig all that. But these slow songs don't really work for me, and I think that sometimes there's a bit of over singing going on. It's a little bit over singing, and I'm not keen on that. But the last song, the title track, Lizard, when I first heard it through, I wasn't sure, but on a second listen,
I realised it was John Anderson singing at the beginning, and I was like, oh wow, it's John Anderson, who I love from Yes. And then it goes into this kind of great kind of flute and saxophone solo by Mel Collins, who's a great player. I really love his playing. I know he played with loads of people as a session player. Played with John Martin, and I really like his playing. And then it kind of goes into this mad mellotron thing again. They love the mellotron, especially on their kind of title tracks, I've noticed. And it goes into this big epic thing, and it goes on for like 20 minutes or something, as you guys probably know if you're King Crimson fans. So the title track really is the killer for me on this record. I thought it was great, and I think this is an album I probably will go back to, although I'll skip the slow one. Like I say, that's not for me, but yeah, I enjoyed this record. Is it my favourite so far? I think the debut is probably my favourite so far, In the Court of the Crimson King. I think that's the most instant and the easiest to get on with, but also the title track of that is just amazing. I keep listening to that actually and going back to it. But the next one I'm going to listen to is called Islands. I have no idea what this album is like. Never heard it before, not a single note. I think it's from 1971, and really looking forward to hearing this one. So the next time you see me, I will have digested Islands a couple of times through, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. So see you in a bit. So hi again, I've just finished listening to the album Islands by King Crimson. First impressions were very Miles Davis, and of course because it was reminding me of Miles Davis, I absolutely loved it. I had a look on Wikipedia, and it was talking about how reviews for this album weren't great at the time, contemporary reviews, saying it was a bit of kind of a digression or something like that. But I actually prefer this to the previous albums. I certainly prefer it a lot more to Lizard. Do I prefer it to the debut album? It's a very different record. They're two different albums, really. Sound almost like two different bands, and of course the personality's changing all the time, so you are getting different kind of influences and musical inputs. Robert Fripp's guitar playing is so unusual and so unique. I just absolutely love it. I think he's like no other player, really. He's not a rock player, and he's not a jazz player either. He's something kind of in between. Very atonal at times, very, very linear, doesn't do any cliches, doesn't do any Ernieing, any bending, should we say, blues kind of Ernie, doesn't do none of that. So I love his playing. Actually made a little list this time because I'm forgetting titles and things. So the opener for Mentora Lady was very reminiscent of the first song on Miles Davis's In a Silent Way, which is called Peaceful, I believe, and absolutely love In a Silent Way by Miles Davis, so any reference to that has got me interested and hooked almost straight away. So really love that one. Sailor's Tale, great kind of opening drum groove on that, again very Miles Davis, very kind of early ambient kind of sounds. Great drum sound again, because I love that 1970s drum sound. Ladies of the Road, lyrically it's not aged well. I think lyrically a lot of these songs, they're very obscure and very strange at times, and I'm not really sure what they're singing about. So lyrically I'm not really on board with King Crimson too much at the moment. The debut album had some great lyrics on it. Since then, I don't know, it's gone a bit weird, and I like weird, but it's just I can't really relate to the lyrics as such. I'm kind of like hearing them in a kind of musical sense, not necessarily connecting with them emotionally. So anyway, Ladies of the Road, I don't think lyrically it's aged too well, because it's clearly about groupies and sleeping around. But that that kind of thing doesn't really offend a 50-year-old me. It's not very kind of PC, should we say. But the music and the playing
is brilliant. I love this song, Ladies of the Road. I think it's a fantastic piece of music, fantastic playing. It's very much of the time, obviously, but it's great. And then Prelude, Song of the Gulls, was like a string quartet, I believe, playing on that, and totally different again. Totally threw me. I thought, okay, this band is not going to warn you which way they're going. They're going to surprise you at each turn. It's absolutely fantastic, and a lovely bit of composition. I really like it. And it was in danger of turning into background music a little bit, but I still really enjoyed it and still really liked it. So yeah, lovely kind of arrangements, and a lovely production, lovely sound. I love that kind of dry kind of string sound that was on there, and you get these albums at the time. And then the final song, the title track, Islands, was great. Some great sax playing by Mel Collins on there. I love all that noodly stuff. I'm a real big jazz fan. I love rock and pop, and I love a good pop song as well. But jazz is where my heart really is, and especially kind of spiritual jazz and spacey jazz. And I think King Crimson, that's what they're doing on this album. They're attempting to do kind of their version of Miles Davis, maybe. And it still sounds like King Crimson, but it does sound more like Miles Davis than the previous King Crimson albums I've been listening to. And for that reason, I think this is probably my favourite one so far. Yeah, shock horror. I think Islands is my favourite one so far. So I'm looking forward to listening to the next one, which I believe might be a live album. Is it the live album next, or is it a studio album called Starless, Bible and Black? I think. My memory's terrible, I'm sorry. So it's either one of those. So I'm going to delve in there and listen to that album, whatever it is, and let you know my thoughts on that. So I'll see you in a bit. Hi again. So the next album I was supposed to listen to was, of course, Earthbound, which is a live album. I got my albums mixed up chronologically there. Listened to it a few times as for the previous ones. Can't get my words out right. Sorry, it's early in the morning. So I listened to it late last night, and then I listened to it again this morning. Read a little bit about it as well, about it being recorded directly onto a tape and not being the best sound quality. Therefore, the band only selling it at a kind of marked down price. I really like this album, actually. It's a bit wild and a bit out there. Obviously, it's very free jazz influenced. We're kind of like in jazz rock, full on jazz rock territory now. The opener, the live version of 21st Century Schizoid Man, I think is better than the studio version. It's more intense. I love the vocal kind of delivery. I love the effect he's got on the vocals. It's really kind of harrowing and almost scary in places. It's full on. I really like that. And then it goes into that full wild jam, which is great. Some very angular, weird guitar playing from Robert Fripp, as per usual. The whole band is like full on in your face. It's fantastic. The rest of the album just kind of does that really for me. Obviously, there's dynamics happening and there's kind of light and shade and things like that in the course of the improvisation. But it's quite an intense listen, and it's very raw kind of sound. Like I said, the sound quality's, not great, and it's not supposed to be great, and that's part of the charm of it. And I really like it, because I also really like live Cream albums, and I wouldn't say they're the same as this, but I see a similarity in terms of the rawness, the improvisation, obviously, and they're kind of, the way they were recorded wasn't exactly clean, if you like. There's not a lot of separation. I kind of like that. I kind of like the intensity of it and the rawness of it. So I really enjoyed listening to this album. Whether I'll go back to it repeatedly, I don't know, but it's certainly worth another listen and an intriguing part of the catalogue. So I did enjoy it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the next album, which is Larks, Tongues in Aspic. I've heard of this album. I've heard it's a bit of a classic. I've seen it knocking around in record shops. Always been tempted to just buy it and see what it was like. So I'm very intrigued. And it's also the first album with Bill Bruford, the drummer from Yes previously. One of my favourite drummers, absolutely fantastic player. Obviously, I know him from Yes and playing with other different kind of bands over the years, and his own solo stuff, which I like, particularly the album he did with Patrick Moraz. I think that's really cool. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this next album and delving into it. So next time you see me, I shall have listened to it twice through, and I'll give you my thoughts as per usual. So see you in a bit. So hi guys, I'm back again after listening to Larks, Tongue in Aspic, and wow, absolutely love this album. Straight away, it's this kind of weird percussion thing at the beginning, almost African, I'm going to say, and then the violin comes in. It sounds like there's a violin and a cello, I'm not sure, or it could be a mellotron, but so intriguing. And then it comes in with that heavy riff, and you know, you know, bad impersonation, I know, but absolutely love this first track. Lark's Tongue Part 1 was superb. Got a few little notes because the old memory is not great, but I listened to it twice, and this is an album that I need to own on vinyl. Like I say, I've seen this knocking around in record shops, always been intrigued by it, but I'm definitely 100% going to be buying this when I see a decent copy for a decent price. Book of Saturday, superb. You know, we're getting kind of more melodic now. John Wetton is got a lovely voice, actually, really nice voice, suits the music really well. You know, he's not kind of bluesy or shouty or anything like that. He's just got a nice tone to his voice, and he knows how to you know, deliver a song and put a song across. And again, his bass playing, you know, very melodic. It's solid. It's not kind of like, doesn't seem to be kind of you know, showy offy. It kind of suits the song really, really well. And I think, you know, as a rhythm section, him and Bill Bruford are perfect. You know, he's you know, John Wetton's got this kind of low kind of middle tone, and you know, Bill Bruford's obviously very precise and very exact type of player. You know, his kit's tuned very high, or at least, you know, that comes across in the production, and that works really well. You know, he got this kind of low end with the bass and some top end with the drums. Perfect. And again, you can tell Bill Bruford's on this album because of his playing, you know, his precision, you know, his very precise playing, you know, the way his little snare rolls that he does, you know, his use of the, what I'm trying to say, of the ride cymbal, you know, very musical, very kind of intricate, fantastic. I think this is the best King Crimson album so far. Exile's fantastic. Easy Money, Talking Drum, then the last song, Larks, Tongue in Aspic Part 2, just absolutely blew me away. I can hear still the jazz influence, but I'm hearing more Eastern influences in this music. More kind of Eastern scales being used. You know, they're moving away from kind of rock or the jazz kind of thing that they had on the previous albums. You know, it feels less kind of improvised and more arranged. Again, you know, Fripp's guitar playing, superb, very angular, very linear at times. You have no clue where he's going to go with those guitar kind of motifs that he uses. You know, he doesn't really do big solos, I don't think. They're just kind of like weird kind of sound shapes that he throws at you. And I absolutely love that. It's such a breath of fresh air from your usual kind of rock guitarist. I mean, I love Steve Howe's playing in Yes, and I've really gotten into Steve Hackett's playing in Genesis. And all three of them are very different players.
But Robert Fripp is even more out there than any of these guys. You know, Steve Howe can be pretty out there, you know, with his kind of jazz and country influences with rock and psychedelia. But Fripp is like on another planet completely. So this album so far is the best one for me. I really love this. Does it get any better? Now, I've heard Red, and like I said before at the beginning of this video, I own Red on vinyl, and I love that album. But Red's very different to Larks Tongue. You know, it's almost like two separate bands, really. But so I'm really intrigued to what the next one sounds like, which is called Starless and Bible Black from 1974. And I'm looking forward to hearing this one, delving into it and exploring it. So the next video, I will have heard it a few times through, and I'll let you know my thoughts. So yeah, see you in a bit. I'm back again, and I've just finished listening to Starless and Bible Black twice through. Now, first impressions, when I listened to it first time, I thought parts of it were a little bit meandering, and you know, it was kind of relying on jamming and kind of noodling about a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But on a second listen, I realised I was wrong. This is a great album. I really enjoy listening to this one. Now, the opening song, The Great Deceiver, when I first put it on, it scared the absolute shit out of me. I was like, whoa, what's going on? It was like so intense. And in your face, that riff comes in like I say, so full on and unusual. And then it kind of comes right down, you know, really, they bring it right down, and you get these kind of really nice dynamics. And then, you know, the vocals come in, and, you know, it's a great song. Really good. And then the one after that, I think, is called Lament, was a really lovely song. You know, John Wetton's voice is really nice, really lovely voice, and his bass playing's great. Bill Bruford, obviously, his drumming's I think his drumming is probably it makes sense for him to be in King Crimson more than it does for him to be in Yes. I think this music suits him a lot more. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love those Yes albums. I love Fragile, I love the Yes album, I love, what else did he play? He played on all those early ones, didn't he? Time and a Word, and Up to Close to the Edge, which I think they're Yes's best albums. It's their best work, and Bill Bruford really adds a lot to those albums. So I'm not taking anything away from that. I just think his playing style really kind of shines through more on these albums. He seems to have more space. You know, those Yes albums, they're quite full. You know, there's kind of a lot of keyboards, isn't there? And you know, Rick Wakeman covers a lot of ground. You know, so I just feel with King Crimson, he really shines through, and he shines through a hell of a lot on this album. He did on the previous one, on Larks Tongue. But this one is really, really shining through. It's got a lovely drum sound. Some of the grooves are incredible. You know, some of those kind of typical Bill Bruford fills, very clean, very precise. And John Wetton, the interplay with John Wetton, I think is wonderful on the bass. With John Wetton's bass playing, I'm hearing a bit of John Entwistle and a bit of Jack Bruce in terms of the aggression and the tone, especially on like the more jammy songs like Fragment and the title track. You know, I'm hearing that kind of interplay that, you know, Jack Bruce and maybe John Entwistle would do. You know, that kind of aggressive bass runs. But he's not doing it all the time, obviously. You know, he's playing quite melodically and for the tune and for the groove a lot of the time. I really love the violin playing on this album. Really adds, especially on the final song, Fracture. I think it's absolutely beautiful. Really adds like a haunting sound to it. I'm getting My Vishnu Orchestra vibes. Now, I know this is more or less around the same time, so I'm thinking, was John McLaughlin influenced by King Crimson or the other way around? I love My Vishnu Orchestra, but I'm starting to think, was he listening to King Crimson? Was he getting, you know, influence and inspiration from King Crimson? I don't know, but I'm seeing similarities, you know, with the jazz rock approach, and the use of the violin, you know, some of Robert Fripp's kind of angular guitar approaches. Not exactly John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin's probably a bit more intense and certainly more dexterous in terms of his lead lines and things like that. But I am seeing a few similarities. There was a tune, I think it's called The Night Watch, Robert Fripp's guitar sound I wasn't keen on. It was very heavily processed. And yeah, I wasn't keen on that. You know, the song itself was okay, but I wasn't that struck on it. And then there's a song called, is it Trio? There's a Trio. It's like, it's very pretty, it's very nice. It's got a violin and some kind of, maybe a mellotron or some kind of organ keyboard going on underneath it. That was very nice. It's, you know, as an album, as you're listening through it, it kind of makes sense. If you just put that song on its own, you'd probably think, well, you know, it's neither here nor there. But in the context of the album, it makes sense because you get the light shade, you know, it brings it down, you know, you get a little bit of a break from the intensity, and then it comes back up. So the whole thing as an album absolutely flows lovely. You know, it makes perfect sense. I think if you pick these songs out and just play one, you know, if you say, oh, to a friend, oh, just listen to this song, you know, or listen to that, it probably wouldn't make sense. You need to listen to these songs in the context they're meant to be as a whole album. So listen to them from beginning to end, basically, is what I think. You know, if someone was to ask me how I should kind of what's the word, consume it, you know, absorb it, I'd say listen to it from the beginning right to the end. Don't just pick tracks out. And so these songs only make sense in the context of the album, is what I'm saying, to me anyway. But I really enjoyed this album. I thought it's great. I'm not sure if it's my favourite so far. You know, I've liked them all in their own way. The second album's probably my least favourite. Then the live album I enjoyed, but I can take it or leave it. This album, I don't think it's as interesting as Larks Tongue in Aspic, but it's certainly slightly different, and it's going towards the kind of jazz rock kind of sound, I think, like I say, like the My Vision Orchestra type thing. So, so I've listened to all the albums from the classic period so far. And the only one left, of course, is this one, Red, which I own, obviously, and I've listened to many times before, and I'm very familiar with it. But I'm going to give it a spin anyway and give you my thoughts on it, even though I've heard it before. So, yeah, I'll be back in a bit, and we'll talk about this one. Okay, see you in a bit. So I've just given this album a listen for the first time in quite a few months, actually. And, having listened to the other albums by King Crimson, it actually starts to make sense. Now, what's amazing is, this is 1974, and the first album came out in 1969. This is like 5 years apart, and it sounds like a totally different band. And the reason for that is, it is a totally different band. The only surviving member through all these albums is, of course, Robert Fripp. And they just sound totally different. They've lost the kind of, it doesn't really sound like prog rock to me anymore. It doesn't sound like that hippie prog rock kind of thing. This is really heavy, dark, dystopian. We got the anxiety-ridden lyrics, the songs about almost like depression and kind of a darkness to them, The lyrics are absolutely fantastic because they suit the music so well, and John Wetton's voice, he delivers them so well. It was such intention, he's doing it in like a proper lead singer, and what I mean by that, he's able to carry the emotion of the song along with the music, so it really is fantastic stuff. Robert Fripp's guitar playing, I think it's like an extension of it on this album. He's playing full on, he's allowing less space as he has done on the previous albums, especially on the first side, the first song, Red. Such a fantastically heavy riff, and according to what I was read online, it's like one of the 50th heaviest albums of all time, and I can see that, It's not like thrash metal or anything, but it's just heavy. It's got a weight to it. And for just three people, to produce that sound is absolutely incredible. Bill Bruford is not a heavy rock drummer, but he sounds heavy and intense here, mainly because his playing is so tight, I think, and intentional. There's no kind of unintended drum fills or drum pans. Everything is precise and clearly thought out. Even when he's improvising, I think it comes across that way. So, the heaviness is definitely there from the first song. Fallen Angel, it's so melodic. It's heavy but melodic. We're getting kind of almost catchy here, in terms of earworms and things like that. And then the closing song, One More Red Nightmares, I absolutely love this. The melody's very catchy, but it's heavy as well. It's got that perfect mix of heavy rock, jazz fusion mixed with kind of almost a pop song sensibility, and of course, fantastic playing. Then when we go on to side two, we've got the first song, Providence, which was just built upon an improvisational jam from Providence in Rhode Island when they were touring. And that's very abstract. We're getting into the free jazz area now, which is more akin to the previous albums, I think. It works on here, it fits on it, but if there's any one song I was going to skip, it would probably be Providence. Although I still enjoy listening to it. There's some interesting kind of guitar work from Robert Fripp, as usual, and John Wetton doing his kind of John Entwistle kind of angry bass, angular kind of leanings, which I think is great, but it's not my favourite part of the album. But if I was going to skip, I would skip it, but I don't. And then the last song, Starless, which was meant to be on the previous album, Starless and Bible Black. This is such an epic song. It's huge. It starts off nice and quiet and kind of serene, and then it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. Much like almost every song on this album, One More Red Nightmare does the same thing. It kind of builds and builds and builds, and it goes into a halftime thing, then it goes back. But Starless is the pinnacle, or the peak of this album, I think, or maybe the peak of King Crimson. We're still in prog rock territory. We're still writing big epic tunes, but they don't sound like Genesis or Yes. There's nothing nice or kind of serene or beautiful about it. It's heavy, it's in your face, and then it comes right down. You've got that guitar motif that comes back in with a heavy riff. There's some wonderful sax playing by Mel Collins on here. He was brought back from a previous incarnation, and it's really great to hear the saxophone along with that heavy riff, because it's not two instruments you would kind of put, or two styles you would think to put together. You got this really heavy kind of doom kind of rock riff, and then we're going to put some jazzy saxophone over it, but it really, really works. And I think this, okay, this is a silly statement because I haven't heard all the later stuff yet, but I think this is the best King Crimson album of the classic period, and I enjoyed Larks, Tonguing, Aspic, and I enjoyed the one after Starless and Bible Black, but this, this beats all of them in my mind. The playing is there, the production is there, the songs are there, the lyrics are great, they match the music. It's almost a perfect album, I think. And to read that Robert Fripp broke the band up just a few weeks before it was released, he kind of had enough, I suppose, and he got bored, who knows. But, broke the band up, and this album didn't do as well as previous albums. It is a real shame, because I think this is an absolute classic. And if you haven't heard it, I advise you go and listen to it immediately. So yeah, this is the peak for me. So anyway, that was my video on exploring the music of King Crimson for the first time. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys, and I'll see you all on the next one. Bye.